So we've got talking about the flood of Noah. I mean, how many different views are there in terms of Christians that look at this?
Well, there's probably dozens of views, Jeff, but there's 4 that really stand out.
What are those for?
Well, a new one that's come up is the Black Sea Inundation. It's
Okay.
only been around for a few years, but it's based on archaeological discoveries that they found evidence that the Black Sea was pushed up and water flooded. And
Okay.
it covered an area that included a good chunk of Turkey and Russia and parts of Greece and Romania, but it did not extend into Mesopotamia, and also dates to about 7,400 years ago.
Okay, so it would be a large kind of regional flood that would have
Large
caused great-
regional flood, but it wouldn't have wiped out all of humanity. It would have wiped out only a portion of humanity and doesn't get into the geographical places that are mentioned in the Genesis flood account. If you
Okay.
read Genesis on the flood, the geographical place names are all in the region of the Persian Gulf and the Mesopotamian plain.
Okay,
So
so that
that's-
would be a problem for this
That's
Black
a problem
Sea
with
flood.
it,
Okay.
but an asset is they can point to a flood in recent history that was really big.
So we've got evidence
So that's
of
an
that
asset.
sort of flood.
And we actually
so
have
we got
evidence for it.
the
Right.
Black Sea Inundation or the Black Sea flood.
Right.
What's the second one?
Well, one we've already talked about is the global flood model,
Okay.
where the flood of Noah actually inundated the entire planet, covered all the mountains, was responsible for all the world's geology.
That's a lot of water.
That's a lot of water, and there's a lot of catastrophes going on. You've got
Right.
huge geological upheavals taking place within a time span of just a few months. And one of the challenges of that is, how do you get the physics to generate all that tectonic activity in just a 5-month window? And even worse, how do you get the ark surviving?
Right.
If you have that much geological disturbance, there will be no survivors.
Yeah,
Not
we've
only
seen
off
even-
the ark, but
yeah.
even on the ark.
Even just with the smaller tectonic activity, the kind of 9 magnitude earthquakes we've seen around here, that generates an enormous amount of upheaval and unrest. So I could imagine the tectonics that would be going on in a global flood would cause some pretty severe consequences.
This is where all the controversy comes on you, because you got mainstream geologists saying this interpretation of the flood is geologically impossible.
Okay.
And then you got flood geologists coming in and saying, no, this is what the text says. And they reach for scientific evidence to support their view.
Okay.
And this is what brings all the attention in modern society to the text and what's going on with the flood of Noah.
Okay, so this one seems to set up a tension between what the scriptural account would be saying and what the
Right.
the physics data would be saying. So what's the third view?
Well, an older model, this has been around for at least a few hundred years, is what's called the tepid flood model. And by
Tepid meaning?
meaning that this is a rather gentle flood in context.
Okay, so you got
So
not catastrophic.
we're not
water
talking
deluge type
hundreds
stuff.
or thousands of feet of water, but maybe tens of feet of water, kind of
Okay.
like the big floods we've seen in the Mississippi Valley.
Okay.
Where hundreds of square miles get flooded 10, 20, even 50 feet deep, lasts a period of time.
Okay.
That was very popular in the 1800s and 1900s, and it's
Why,
still
why,
very
why,
popular.
why is that popular? I mean,
Well, it's popular because there's no geological difficulties with that kind of a flood. I mean, we can easily imagine things that would happen that would produce that kind of a flood. Would also explain why we have no evidence of the flood remaining to this day.
okay.
But the weakness is that obviously we're only talking about a segment of humanity being wiped out by this flood. And theologians have come in with this tepid flood model and saying, well, it's only the most wicked people that were wiped out. So there was the 8 people on board Noah's Ark, but there have been other people as well that wouldn't have been impacted, and so they try to claim that the text is really not speaking about a flood that's universal to everybody outside the flood. And then contrasting, there's a 4th position, which is the idea that the flood was not global in extent, but it was universal in that it wiped out all of humanity outside the ark and all the animals that were associated with humanity.
Okay, so it differs from the Black Sea flood in that it does wipe out, or it would be wiping out all of humanity. It just differs from the global that it doesn't cover the whole earth. It's different from the tepid in that it's catastrophic to everybody around, and so this would be kind of a universal flood model.
Right, and part of that model is that humanity had not yet become globally spread, and so this would be a flood that would take place before humanity had entered into Australia, North America, and South America, and probably a time when humanity hadn't extended much beyond the Persian Gulf region and the Mesopotamian plain. And therefore you wouldn't need a flood of say tens of millions of square miles. A million square mile flood would be adequate to wipe out all of humanity. Now, it still means that we got a very catastrophic flood. But it's at a level of catastrophe where, once again, if you've got the flood far enough back in time, say back in the time of the close of the last ice age, a few tens of thousands of years ago, then indeed you would not expect to find any evidence remaining today, even if the flood was that extensive.
Well, let me ask this question then. So we've got 4 different floods models that you've talked about. You said that there may be dozens beyond that. As a Christian who wants to hold Scripture in high regard and reconcile things with the God's revelation and creation, what are principles for how do we evaluate flood models? What are the key features to look at? What are the important things to pay attention to?
Well, that's a good point, Jeff. God's not only given us the book of Scripture, He's given us the book of nature. And just like we need to integrate through the 66 books of the Bible, we need to integrate through all the different scientific disciplines, because it's not enough to take the record of nature literally.
Right.
We need to take it consistently. Likewise, it's not enough to take the Bible literally. We need to take it literally and consistently, because we're worshiping a God that cannot contradict Himself.
And that seems like a task and a job that's going to be a lot of fun, because there's a lot of work to do and a lot of things to understand.
A lot of fun, but a lot of work too.
That's a good thing to do.